The text arrived at 11:47 on Christmas morning. I was standing in my kitchen with a turkey half-basted and Frank's table set for 7. The good plates, the cloth napkins. He picked out the year he built the table himself, a candle in the center that I'd lit at dawn because I wanted the house to smell like it used to when Claire was small and the whole world fit inside these 4 walls. The message was 3 lines long. You are not joining us. Derek thinks it's better to leave things as they are for now. Please don't make this harder than it already is. My hands were slick with butter from the bird. I watched a single drop slide off my index finger and land on the screen, smearing the word please into something unreadable. My chest did a thing I can only describe as folding inward, like a kitchen chair kicked sideways. A small, private collapse that made no sound. I set the phone on the counter. I picked the baster back up. I put it down again. The turkey sat there, raw and pale and useless, and the candle was still burning, and the napkins were still folded, and nobody was coming. Nobody was ever coming. Then I did something Claire and Derek never saw coming. I picked up that phone, and I called a lawyer. But that call was only the first move. What I uncovered in the weeks after that text would pull apart everything I believed about my daughter, my son-in-law, and the quiet machinery they'd been assembling behind my back for nearly a year. And by the time I understood the full shape of what they were after, they had already made one critical mistake. They assumed the woman they were trying to erase was too old, too lonely, and too trusting to fight back. If you've ever been locked out by the very people you poured your whole life into, stay with me on this one. Subscribe if you want to hear stories like this more often, and leave a comment if you've lived through something like it yourself. Because this is the story of what happens when the person everyone counted on to be convenient finally decides she's done. But I need to go back, not to Christmas, but to the first crack, the one I almost missed. It started with a key. It was a Saturday in July, 6 months before that text. I was in the backyard, watering the tomatoes, when I heard the front door open and close. Not a knock, not a doorbell, the deadbolt turning, the hinge creaking, footsteps in my hallway. I came around the corner with a watering can still in my hand and found Derek standing in my entryway, holding a grocery bag. Hey Margaret, Claire asked me to drop off some of that soup you like. He said it casually, like walking into someone's house unannounced was the most natural thing in the world. How did you get in? He held up a key. A brass copy, fresh cut, still bright. Claire had one made. Figured it was smart, in case of emergencies. You're out here alone now. He said, alone the way you'd say vulnerable. Not cruel on the surface, practical, concerned even. That was the thing about Derek. Everything he did came wrapped in the language of care. I didn't say anything. I took the soup. He left. And I stood in my hallway holding a bag of soup and staring at the door he'd just locked behind him. And something shifted in my chest. Not panic, not yet, just a low, unfamiliar unease, like hearing a sound in your house at 2 a.m., and not being able to tell if it's the pipes or something else. I should have asked Claire about that key right then. I didn't. I told myself it was fine, she was my daughter, he was my son-in-law. If they wanted a key for emergencies, that meant they were looking out for me. That's what I believed. That's what I needed to believe. Because Frank had been gone for 4 years, and the silence in this house was heavy enough without looking for reasons to make it heavier. Frank, my husband, he died in September, pancreatic cancer, 8 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. He was 61. We'd been together 34 years, and the house we lived in was the house we'd bought together in 1991, a 2-story colonial in Maplewood that we couldn't really afford at the time, but Frank said, a house wasn't something you saved for, it was something you grew into. He built the kitchen table from a slab of reclaimed oak he found at a demolition sale, spent 3 weekends sanding it in the garage, carved my initials and his into the underside so no one would ever see them except us, and we'd always know they were there. That table held every birthday cake Claire ever blew out, every Thanksgiving he ever carved, every homework assignment she ever struggled through with her head in her hands. It was the center of everything. After Frank died, I kept the table polished. I kept the house exactly as it was. His reading chair in the living room, his tools in the garage, his cologne on the dresser. People said I was holding on. Maybe I was, but I didn't see the point of letting go of the only things that still smelled like him. Claire was 32. She and Derek had been married 5 years. Their daughter, Emma, had just turned 6. My only grandchild, a girl with Frank's eyes and a laugh that could fill a room the way his used to. I saw Emma every Tuesday and every other weekend. That was the rhythm. That was what kept me going. Or so I thought. Because that key in July was the first ripple, and I didn't yet know it was the edge of a tide. The next thing that didn't fit was Emma's birthday. It was in September, the same month as the anniversary of Frank's death, which always made the air feel heavy for me, but which I tried not to impose on anyone else. Claire told me it would be a small party, just Emma's school friends, at one of those indoor play centers. It'll be chaos, Mom. You won't enjoy it. We'll do something just the three of us later. I said, of course. I understood. I sent a gift, a set of watercolor paints and a pad of real artist paper, because Emma loved to draw, and I'd been teaching her on Tuesdays, sitting at Frank's table, showing her how to mix blue and yellow to get the exact green of the tomatoes in my garden. 2 days after the party, I was on Facebook, something I rarely checked, and there it was, an album Claire had posted. 47 photos, both grandmothers there, Derek's mother, Vivian, in a coordinated outfit, holding Emma on her lap, aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends I'd known for 20 years, a catered cake with 5 tiers, a rented, private room with decorations. I was the only one who wasn't there. I didn't cry. I sat at Frank's table and stared at my phone and scrolled through those photos one by one, studying the backgrounds, the seating arrangements, the way everyone was positioned around my granddaughter, as if I'd been carefully cut out of the frame. I felt it in my throat first, a tightness, like swallowing something that wouldn't go down. Then in my hands. Then nowhere, because I shut it off. I told myself it was a mistake, an oversight, that Claire would explain. I called her the next morning. I saw the photos, honey. It looked like more than just school friends. There was a pause. Then a sigh. The kind that's already decided you're being unreasonable before the conversation starts. Mom, it was a combined thing. Some of the parents wanted to stay, and it just grew. I didn't want to overwhelm you. Overwhelm me? You know what I mean? It's loud, it's chaotic, and honestly, Derek's family can be a lot. I was trying to protect you from feeling out of place. Out of place. My granddaughter's birthday, and I would have felt out of place. I let it go. I told myself she meant well. But that night, lying in bed in the room where Frank used to read beside me, I replayed her voice in my head, the slight impatience, the practiced softness, the way protect you sounded exactly like exclude you if you tilted it half a degree. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and stared at the ceiling and told myself I was being paranoid. I was not being paranoid. The questions about my memory started in October. Claire came over on a Tuesday, not her usual day, but she said she wanted to check in. She brought tea, which she never did. We sat at the table and she asked, in a voice I'd never heard from her before, measured, careful, like she was conducting an interview, whether I'd been forgetting things. Like what? I asked. Like last week, you told me twice about the leaking faucet. And you asked me when Dad's birthday was. You've never had to ask me that before, Mom. I asked, because I was emotional. The anniversary is hard, you know that. I know. I just want to make sure you're okay. Derek noticed it too. You repeated a story to him at dinner last month, word for word. He's worried. Derek was worried. Derek, who came to dinner maybe 4 times a year and spent most of it on his phone. Derek was now monitoring my cognition. Then came the paperwork. A week later, Derek showed up alone. He said Claire was busy with Emma, but he wanted to help me get organized. He brought a folder, color-coded, tabbed, thorough. Inside were copies of my mortgage statement, my bank records, my insurance policies. He'd already gathered them somehow, which meant he'd been through my files when I wasn't home, using that key. Margaret, I want to make sure everything's in order. You know, just in case. He pulled out a form. This is just an update to your estate documents. It names Claire and me as your primary representatives. Standard stuff. It just means if anything ever happens to you, we can handle things without a legal mess. He made it sound like renewing a magazine subscription. He pointed to the signature line. I picked up the pen. And here's where I have to be honest with you, because this is the part where I failed myself. I didn't read it, not carefully. I skimmed the first paragraph, saw the words financial matters and healthcare decisions, and I thought, this is my daughter and her husband. They're trying to help. Frank always handled the paperwork, and I was used to trusting the person handing me the pen. I signed it. Derek folded the form, slipped it into the folder, and smiled. You're making the smart choice, Margaret. Claire's going to be relieved. He left. I washed the teacups. I didn't think about it again for 2 months. Thanksgiving was the next fracture. I was invited this time. A small mercy that now feels like a setup. Claire and Derek's house was 40 minutes away, a new build in a development where every house had a 3-car garage and a front door that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. I drove there in my 2009 Camry, the one with the dent in the passenger door from the time Emma backed her tricycle into it, and I parked on the street because the driveway was full. Inside, the table was long and formal. Not a table where anyone had ever built anything, just a purchased surface in a dining room that was used twice a year. I was seated at the far end, near the kitchen door, closest to the sound of the dishwasher running. Vivian, Derek's mother, sat beside Claire at the opposite end, wearing a cashmere cardigan and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Emma was beside her, and between them was a space that could have fit me. Derek carved the turkey. He served Vivian first, then Claire, then Emma, then the other guests. I was last. He placed the plate in front of me with a nod and said, "There you go, Margaret, nice and easy on the portion. You mentioned your stomach's been sensitive." I had never told him my stomach was sensitive. I had mentioned to Claire once in passing that I'd had some heartburn. That casual comment had traveled from daughter to son-in-law and come back to me as a diagnosis, served publicly at a dinner table, as though my body was a matter of household management. During dinner, the conversation turned to houses. Vivian mentioned that a neighbor had downsized. Such a relief for her, Vivian said, not looking at me. These big older homes, they become a burden. You can't maintain them. They become dangerous, really. Stairs, old wiring. It's not responsible to stay. Derek nodded. We've been saying the same thing about Margaret's place. It's a lot of house for one person. Claire said nothing. She looked at her plate. I held my fork very still and said, I like my house. Frank and I built a life there. Of course you did, Derek said, smiling. And that life was beautiful. But things change. People adapt. That's not giving something up. That's being smart. I changed the subject. I asked Emma about school, but my hands were cold for the rest of the meal, and the food tasted like nothing. It was after dinner that I heard it. I was in the hallway, looking for the bathroom, and I passed the study, a small room with the door half closed. Derek was inside, on the phone. I didn't mean to listen, but his voice carried, and one sentence landed in my ear like a stone in still water. The property valuation came back higher than we expected. 847. If we file next month, we can have her placed by spring. I stopped walking. My hand was on the wall. I stood there for 3 seconds, maybe 4, and then I heard footsteps and I moved, quickly, silently, into the bathroom, where I locked the door and sat on the edge of the tub and tried to breathe. The property. 847. Filed next month. Placed by spring. I didn't know what it meant. Not yet. But my body knew something was wrong before my mind could catch up. The same way you know a stove is hot before you register the pain. I drove home that night in the dark, going 5 under the speed limit, gripping the wheel with both hands, and I didn't turn on the radio, and I didn't cry, and I told myself I was tired and I'd misheard. But I hadn't misheard. 3 weeks later, Claire came by the house. She was on her phone when she walked in. She'd stopped knocking months ago, and she set her bag on the kitchen counter while she stepped into the living room to take a call. I was at the sink, rinsing dishes, and her bag tipped. A folder slid out, papers scattered across the counter. I picked them up. I wasn't snooping. I was picking up papers that had fallen on my own counter in my own kitchen, but when I straightened them, a printout caught my eye. A Zillow page, my address, my house, estimated value, $847,000. And in the margins, in Derek's handwriting, I'd recognize his tight, slanted script anywhere, were notes. After kitchen remodel, comp support $920K. Estate sale for contents. Timeline. 90 days from filing. Estate sale for contents. That meant Frank's chair, his tools, the table he built with his hands. They were going to sell it all. I put the papers back. I didn't say a word when Claire came back. I poured her tea. I smiled. And inside my chest, Something that had been bending for months finally snapped, not with a crash, but with a clean, silent click, like a lock falling into place. That was the moment I stopped being a mother who was hurt and became a woman with a plan. But I didn't act yet. I needed to understand the full picture first, and I needed to do it without them knowing I was looking. I went to the county clerk's office on a Tuesday, the day Claire usually visited, so I told her I had a doctor's appointment and couldn't do our usual Tuesday. I asked to see any recent filings related to my property. There were none yet, but the clerk mentioned, offhand, that a power of attorney had been registered in my name 3 weeks prior, a durable POA, filed by Derek and Claire Halloway as authorized representatives. A durable power of attorney, the form I'd signed without reading. That night, I went to my filing cabinet, the one Derek had organized for me, and I found the copy he'd left. I read every word. It wasn't a simple estate update. It granted Derek and Claire full authority over my financial accounts, my real property, and my healthcare decisions in the event that I was deemed unable to manage my own affairs. And the threshold for that determination? A letter from a physician, or, in some states, a notarized statement from a family member. A notarized statement from a family member. Claire could sign a piece of paper saying I was losing my mind and Derek could take my house. The key, the medication questions, the forgetfulness observations he'd been cataloging, the Zillow printout, the phone call at Thanksgiving, file next month, placed by spring, it was all connected. Every piece I'd stumbled over for 6 months was part of the same machine, and the machine was designed to do one thing: declare me incompetent, seize my home, sell it, and pocket the money. I sat at Frank's table with that document in front of me, and I didn't move for 20 minutes. The house was quiet. The candle on the table had burned down to a stub. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the dark. And I thought about Frank, how he'd say, "Margaret, you don't have to take this," how he'd put his hand on the back of my neck and say, "You're tougher than all of them." I picked up the phone. I didn't call Claire, I didn't call Derek, I didn't call Vivian. I called a woman named Patricia Haynes, an elder law attorney whose name I'd found on a card tacked to the bulletin board at the senior center where I played bridge on Thursdays. It was 9 p.m. I left a message. She called me back at 8 a.m. the next day. "Tell me everything," she said. I did. The key, the birthday exclusion, the memory questions, the form I signed, the phone call, the Zillow printout, the county clerk. I laid it out like evidence on a table, because that's what it was, and Patricia listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said something that made my spine straighten for the first time in months. "Margaret, what they've done is not a misunderstanding. It's a coordinated effort to establish conservatorship under false pretenses. The POA you signed is revocable. You are of sound mind, and you can terminate it today. But we need to move fast, because if they file a petition before you act, you'll be fighting uphill." That afternoon, I sat in Patricia's office and signed a revocation of the power of attorney. She filed it with the county the same day. She also helped me draft an irrevocable trust transferring ownership of my house to a trust I controlled, meaning no one could sell it, leverage it, or claim it without my direct authority. And she helped me update my will. Claire was not removed from it, but she was no longer the sole executor, and Derek's name appeared nowhere. While I was doing this, I did something else. I called Ruth. Ruth was Frank's younger sister. She lived 2 hours north, in a small town called Warren, and, after Frank died, we'd drifted, not from any argument, just from grief pulling us in different directions. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year, but when I told her what was happening, she went quiet for a long moment, and then said, "I'm coming down this weekend. And Margaret, don't you dare apologize for calling." She arrived Friday evening. She brought a casserole and a box of Frank's old photos that she'd been holding on to. We sat at the table, Frank's table, and I told her everything, and she listened, and at the end she said, "Frank would have already been at their door. But you're doing this smarter. That's okay. Let's be smart." Derek found out something had shifted the following week. He used his key, the brass one, the one Claire had cut, and the deadbolt didn't turn. I'd changed the locks. He stood on my porch and knocked, and I opened the door but didn't step aside. "Margaret, the key doesn't work." "I know. Can I get a new one?" "No." He looked at me for a long moment. His jaw tightened, the first time I'd seen the careful mask slip. Is there a problem? Not for me. There isn't. He left. That evening, Claire called. Her voice was sharp, clipped, the way it got when Derek had briefed her on what to say. Mom, why did you change the locks? Derek said you were rude to him. He was just trying to check on you. I changed the locks because I want my home to be mine. That's not rude. That's a boundary. Since when do you need boundaries with family? Since family started letting themselves in without asking. Silence. Then, Derek thinks you're being paranoid. He thinks this might be a sign that I'm what, Claire? Losing it? Is that what he thinks? Is that what you think? She didn't answer. The silence was its own answer, and it sat between us like a wall. I'll talk to you later, Mom. She hung up. 2 days after that, I received a letter, formal, on law firm letterhead, from an elder law practice in a town 40 minutes away. It informed me that Derek and Claire Holloway intended to petition for conservatorship, and that a hearing had been requested to evaluate my capacity to manage personal and financial affairs. The letter cited documented incidents of memory loss, repeated confusion, and signs of deteriorating judgment observed by close family members. It listed dates: the soup delivery in July, the faucet conversation, the story I'd repeated at dinner, the heartburn comment. Each one had been recorded and reframed as evidence of decline. They had been building a case against my mind for 6 months. Every kindness, every question, every visit, all of it was data collection. I was not a mother being looked after. I was a target being assessed. Patricia had already prepared for this. She'd had me evaluated by an independent geriatric psychiatrist, a thorough, 2-hour cognitive assessment that confirmed what I already knew. I was sharp, I was competent, and there was nothing wrong with my memory that grief and loneliness hadn't already explained. Patricia filed the results with the court and submitted a formal objection to the conservatorship petition. The hearing was delayed. Derek's legal footing started to crack, but the legal battle was only half of what I had planned. I invited everyone to my house: Claire, Derek, Vivian, Ruth, Claire's aunt on Frank's side, Donna, who lived nearby and who I'd been quietly speaking to for weeks. I told Claire it was a family meeting to clear the air. She agreed, probably because she thought she'd be walking into a room where she could manage me. She arrived with Derek and Vivian on a Saturday afternoon, and the first thing she saw was Patricia sitting at Frank's table with a legal folder in front of her. Derek stopped in the doorway. What is this? Sit down, Derek, I said. We're going to have a conversation that's long overdue. The table was set. Not for food, for evidence. Patricia had organized the documents in chronological order. I stood at the head of the table, the end where Frank always sat, the end where he carved the turkey every Thanksgiving, and I began. In July, Derek let himself into my home with a key I never authorized. In September, I was excluded from my granddaughter's birthday, while the rest of the family was invited. In October, Claire began questioning my memory and recording my conversations. In November, Derek had me sign a durable power of attorney without explaining what it was. At Thanksgiving, the first overheard him on the phone discussing the sale of my property. In December, I found a Zillow valuation of my home in Claire's bag with Derek's handwritten notes about a timeline for sale and an estate sale for my belongings. And this month, I received a letter from a law firm announcing a conservatorship petition based on documented incidents that were, in fact, fabricated observations collected over 6 months under the guise of concern. I laid each document on the table as I spoke: the Zillow printout, the POA, the conservatorship letter, the county filing, the revocation, the psychiatric evaluation, one by one, like cards turned face up in a hand they thought I didn't have. Derek's face changed. The careful composure, the one he wore like a suit, began to fail. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Margaret, you're misunderstanding this. We were trying to protect you. The house is too much for... The house is mine. Frank and I bought it. Frank built this table. Frank's name is on the deed. And you were going to sell it and put me in a facility and call it love. Vivian stood up. I think we should leave. You can leave, Ruth said from her chair, her voice calm and hard as iron. But you should know that everything on this table has been filed with the court, and Patricia has also submitted a complaint with the state bar against the attorney who helped you draft that conservatorship petition on fabricated grounds. Derek looked at Claire. Claire was staring at the table, at the documents, at the Zillow printout with his handwriting on it, and her face was doing something I'd never seen. Crumbling, layer by layer, the way a mask does when the person behind it runs out of reasons to keep holding it up. "Mom?" she whispered. "I didn't." "You did, Claire. You signed the letter. You recorded my conversations. You stood at that Thanksgiving table while your mother-in-law called my home a burden, and you said nothing. You told your daughter I was sick. You let your husband walk into my house with a key and go through my files, and you called it looking out for me." I thought. She stopped. Her eyes were wet. "Derek said it was the responsible thing to do. He said you were declining. He said the house was a liability, and that putting you somewhere safe was what? Kinder? Easier? More profitable?" She couldn't answer. I looked at her for a long time. I looked at her the way you look at someone you love, who has just shown you who they chose to be when they thought you weren't watching. And I felt the grief of it, not the anger, which had already burned down to ash, but the grief, because the daughter I raised, the one who sat at this table and did her homework and laughed with Frank's eyes, had let a man with a spreadsheet convince her that her mother was an asset to be managed. "I'm not going to be placed anywhere," I said. "The house is in a trust. The power of attorney is revoked. My will has been updated. If you want a relationship with me, it starts with you choosing to be my daughter instead of his accomplice. And that choice is yours. But I will not beg for it, and I will not wait for it." Derek left. He didn't say a word. He walked out the front door, and Vivian followed, and the room got quieter and larger, and Claire was still sitting at the table with tears on her face and her hands in her lap. And I sat down across from her, and neither of us spoke for a while. "I told Emma you were sick," Claire said finally. "She asked why you stopped coming on Tuesdays, and I said, Grandma wasn't feeling well." She covered her mouth with her hand. "What kind of person says that?" I reached across the table, not to forgive, not yet, but to hold her hand, because even now, even after everything, she was still the girl who learned to paint at this table, and I couldn't watch her break without reaching for her. "You tell her the truth," I said. "You tell her Grandma is fine. You tell her she can come here on Tuesday and we'll paint tomatoes in the kitchen like we always did. And you don't bring Derek's key to my house again, because there is no key." The weeks that followed were not a clean resolution. They never are. Derek retained a lawyer and tried to contest the trust. Patricia crushed it in a hearing that lasted 11 minutes. The conservatorship petition was formally dismissed with prejudice after the court reviewed the psychiatric evaluation and the documentation of Derek's financial motive. The state bar opened an investigation into the elder law firm that had filed the petition on fabricated grounds. Claire filed for divorce in March. I didn't ask for details. She told me one evening at the table that Derek had been planning it since before Thanksgiving, that he'd shown her spreadsheets projecting the sale of the house, the profit margins, the facility costs versus the equity. He had it all mapped out, she said. He made it look like estate planning. He made it look like he was helping. He made it look like a lot of things, I said. Emma came back on a Tuesday. She walked through the door and dropped her backpack in the hallway and ran to the kitchen. And I had the watercolors set out on Frank's table, and the paper, and a glass of water, and she climbed into the chair, the one with the cushion I'd sewn from a tablecloth of my mother's, and she picked up a brush and said, "Grandma, can we paint the tomatoes again?" And I said, "We can paint whatever you want, sweetheart." Ruth started coming down on weekends. She brought her dog, a fat beagle named Louie, who slept under the table during meals. She helped me fix the gutter Frank had been meaning to repair, and she sat with me on the porch in the evenings, and we talked about him. Not with grief anymore, not with that suffocating weight, but with the easy warmth of people who remembered someone worth remembering. Claire came every Thursday. We didn't talk about Derek much. We talked about Emma's school, about the job Claire started at a dental office, about the tomatoes in the garden that were coming in heavy that summer. Sometimes the conversation was stilted. Sometimes she'd go quiet, and I'd know she was replaying it in her head. The spreadsheets, the key, the text she sent me on Christmas morning while I stood in my kitchen with a turkey nobody was going to eat. I didn't let her drown in it, but I didn't let her pretend it hadn't happened either. The house stayed mine. The table stayed mine. Frank's initials, carved underneath where no one could see, stayed mine. I think about that Christmas morning sometimes. The text, the turkey, the candle burning for people who never came. I used to replay it and feel that same collapse in my chest, that folding inward. I don't anymore. Not because it stopped hurting, but because I understand now what that text really was. It wasn't a daughter rejecting her mother. It was a door closing on a version of my life where I kept shrinking myself to fit inside someone else's plan. And the woman who stood in that kitchen and put down the baster and picked up the phone, she was the woman Frank always knew I was. I just hadn't met her yet. Last Sunday, I sat at the table with Emma and Ruth and Claire. Louis was under the table, snoring. Emma had painted a picture of the house, our house, with a garden and the tomatoes and a stick figure on the porch that she said was me. Claire looked at it and said, "You got Grandma's hair right. It's always going everywhere." And Emma said, "Because she's always in the garden. She doesn't care." I looked at that painting. I looked at the table. I ran my hand along the edge where the grain swirled, where Frank's hands had sanded it smooth 30 years ago, and I thought about what he used to say. The people who show up are your family. The ones who don't never were. Everyone I love was at that table. The chair at the head was empty. It will probably always be empty. But the table was full, and the kitchen smelled like coffee and paint and warm bread. And outside the window, the tomatoes were turning red on the vine. And I was home. I was home. And nobody was taking it from me again.